Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you. I'm your brother in faith, Shabir Ally, speaking with you from the Muslim Media Hub. This Ramadan, we're dealing with faith and doubt, 30 big questions about belief. The question for today is, why does it seem that Islam has so many rules? So let's deal with that. And by the way, I'm very excited to be speaking with you on the subject today because we have actually reached the halfway point of Ramadan, the 15th day of the month. MashaAllah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us all of our observation for the first half of the month so far, and to forgive us for any shortcomings and mistakes, any lack of attention to the requirements of this month. And we ask Allah to help us to observe the rest of the month in a way that is pleasing to Him. Now, on to my subject and the question, why does it seem that Islam has so many rules? The basic answer to that is that Islam intends to be a comprehensive system. In some religions of the world, people are accustomed to dividing and separating between the state law and the religious law. But in classical Islamic times, both the state law and religious law or religious precepts would all fall under the same umbrella. There was no such separation. And by the way, in the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, what is referred to as the Tanakh of our Jewish friends, the Hebrew Scriptures, that same combination is there between state law and personal law. In the Torah, you have all kinds of regulations about how to enact capital punishment by the state, how to regulate land ownership and things of that nature, and even right down to how to clean your house from mold and such things. So it's really an all-encompassing set of laws. How many laws are there? Some people have counted them and added more laws that are due to the interpretation of Jewish scholars over time. Moses Maimonides, the rabbi, in the Middle Ages, enumerated 613 commandments. 365 of those are negative commandments, and 248 of them are positive commandments, so do's and don'ts. Now, most Christians are familiar with the 10 commandments of the Old Testament, but that's only 10 out of many more commandments, as we see the scholars have derived even 613. So yes, if Christianity had remained a state religion, then one might expect that a sort of law that is similar to the laws which are there in the Bible would have prevailed. And so there will be a combination of laws dealing with all aspects of human life. So it continues to be thought of in the religion of Islam. There's no such separation. What happened with Christianity was, over time, other powers were dominating. For example, Christianity found itself under Roman rule, and so it was Roman law that came to the fore, and Christians governed their personal lives according to the teachings of the Bible, but in public spheres it was a secular law that governed, and that remains the case in many parts of the world, even where Christians are a majority of the population. Now, coming back to the Islamic context, so think about life 1400 years ago, and there was no such thing as modern law, and so the law had to be instituted from scratch. Now, of course, there were certain things which are already recognized in society, and so the Quran incorporates all of that and then harnesses them into a comprehensive system. So the Quran deals with political law. How does one nation state deal with another? Of course, they were not called nation states at the time, but how does one group of people as a polity deal with another group of people? How do Muslims deal with other groups at the time? Within the group, how do we govern society? How is society to function? Within a family structure, how is family law to be delineated? created. And then personal law. How does one govern oneself in a way that is pleasing to God, that is of most benefit to human beings and to other creatures of God? And how does one withhold oneself from causing harm to others? In a modern situation, all of these laws do exist, but they're not considered to be religious laws. And of course, we all recognize the need for having laws. Without having laws, how are societies going to be governed? How do we know if I've encroached too much on my neighbor's property? Where do I place my fence? This has to be the subject of law. Law has to be in place. Either it is a secular law, or it is there as part of the religious law. Now, in an Islamic conception, law really belongs to God. It is God who created us, and He has the right to delineate for us what the laws should be. And He has the right to put restrictions on us so that we can't do certain things because God said we cannot do those things. Now, what should be borne in mind is that all of the laws of Islam are there for public benefit or benefits of the individuals. None of these are beneficial to God. God does not gain anything from our worshiping Him and from our staying away from evil. It is we who gain from worshiping God and from staying away from evil. Muslim scholars looking at Islamic law have identified certain objectives which they see to be the objectives of the Islamic law, the spirit behind the law. And generally, they delineate 5 such objectives. They say the preservation of life, of intellect, of religion, of property, and of honor or progeny. So if we look at these 5, which are referred to in the Arabic as maqasid, or objectives in Islamic law, we see that, for example, preservation of the intellect. This is one of the reasons why alcohol is prohibited, because as we explained in the previous episode in this series, alcohol clouds the judgment, and so it is really reducing from that intellect that God has given us to preserve. Preservation of life. We know from the Old Testament, thou shalt not commit murder. So what does that do? It kills life. The Quran also says, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ. Do not take the life that God has consecrated, except, of course, in the pursuit of the state law of justice, in case there is capital punishment. The preservation of life we see as one of the objectives. So sometimes when people think of law, they think, oh, all these things we have to do, or all these prohibitions we can't do. So it's as if law is for our detriment, and we wish there were no law. But on the other hand, sometimes people see that things are being done wrong in society by other people, and they wish that there was a law. Sometimes there's no law and people are getting away with things. And we say there ought to be a law. Well, that's what Islam has provided for us. The Quran has given us the laws from God. So we mentioned the preservation of the intellect, the preservation of the mind, and the preservation of life. That explains the commandment, thou shalt not kill, and the Quranic equivalent of that. What about preservation of property? Well, the Quran, by giving prohibitions against stealing and against giving false weights and false measures, this is to preserve the property of people. So somebody comes to you to buy something, you cannot give them short weight, because in that case, you're usurping their property without giving them something in an agreeable exchange. You are cheating them. So cheating, lying, stealing, usurping the properties of others, even charging interest on money that you lend to others. This is prohibited in Islam because this is an unjust usurpation of the properties of other people. So this is not allowed. This is for the purpose of preserving the properties of individuals and, of course, of the community as a whole. Preservation of progeny, or of honor. So children should be born in honor. We don't want a situation where children do not know their parents, and children need to be nurtured in a nest environment where both parents are present and they complement each other in rearing the child. And so the Quran prescribes marriage as the way in which families will be formed and children will be born in a safe and protective environment. So we have laws regarding marriage. And because marriage sometimes ends in divorce, there has to be laws regarding divorce as well. How do we know when two persons are truly married? And how do we know when their marriage has actually come to a decisive split? And how to prevent the marriage from coming to a decisive split? So you see, all of these entail laws all along the way. The laws of Islam are there for the achievement of certain good objectives. And without the laws, those objectives would not have been achieved. And we need then to respect the law and to make sure that in applying the law, we are reaching those objectives. Now, sometimes it may appear to people that there are too many laws in the Islamic faith because we live in contexts in which we are not going to apply these laws. So we want to know, like, why all of these laws? Because we live in situations mostly in which in the non-Muslim part of the world, where Muslims are not the majority and where Islamic law is not being applied, like let's say in the Western world, especially where Muslims live as minorities, we are subject to the state law. So it might seem that we don't need another set of laws that do the same thing which the state law does. And that's a fair comment. So in that case, Muslims can look at their personal law and their family law as prescribed in the Quran and in classical Islamic jurisprudence, and deal with the rest of the laws as delineated by the state. So this is a happy marriage of the two sets of laws, and many democracies allow for and recognize the value of Muslim personal and family law, and even legitimizes those laws to be applied by Muslims for themselves and for their families without contravening the state law. Muslims have a sense that they're connected to our classical Islamic law, at least in these spheres, and at the same time, they are living according to the laws of their lands. They are peaceful citizens living in harmony with other people. Even in some Muslim majority countries, the laws that are being applied are not necessarily classical Islamic law or any Islamic law. They might be laws which are based on other systems, French system, a British system, or so on, and so forth. And there too, Muslims may have to resort to Islamic law for personal and family issues. But there are one or two states which continue to insist on the total application of Islamic law in all spheres, at least in principle, but the extent to which this is being applied factually on the ground, this is a disputable question. But what is important for us to know in modern times is that Islamic law is a changing and dynamic concept. There are certain basic objectives that we've already delineated: preservation of life, of intellect, of progeny, of property, and these objectives should be met in the application of the law in our present and dynamic and changing circumstances. We should not apply the letter of the law in such a way that we thwart the spirit or we thwart the objectives, but we also always have to keep those objectives in mind. And often people feel that there are too many laws because some of these laws, the way they have been framed in classical times, when applied in our present times, they seem to be a hindrance rather than a help. But these laws were made, in fact, to help us to achieve the good objectives that we have already delineated, and we should not lose sight of that. So in short, I would say that no, Islam does not have too many laws. May seem so because of the new circumstances in which we live, but all societies need to have laws, and most often they have these laws as state laws and not as religious laws. And the difference is that in Islamic conception, in the Islamic way of thinking of things, all of the laws belong to God, and they should all be integrated integrated into one whole. This is not always practical or possible, especially where Muslims live as minorities. So in those situations, we practice our family and personal law according to our religious precepts as allowed by the states in which we live, while adhering to the laws of the states so that we live according to the law of the land in harmony with other our fellow human beings where we lived. I'm your brother in faith, Shabir Ally, signing off from the Muslim Media Hub. Thank you for watching. Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum. Did you realize that most people have never stepped into a mosque or opened the Quran? What they know about Islam is what they hear in the media. Let's make sure that they hear the truth. This Ramadan, support Muslim Media Hub so we can get the message across to the nations. Your donations are zakat eligible and tax deductible. To donate, go to muslimmediahub.com.